Out of New York City, we are hearing Diddy's attorneys speaking to the media after he was sentenced earlier today. This is live.
Yeah, we are planning to appeal.
I want to hear them, bro.
We are planning to appeal. We think we have strong bases to appeal. The strongest basis is that the jury reached a verdict on coercion. It found there was not coercion, and I think the judge said coercion today as a basis for a sentence at least a dozen times. We think that that is unconstitutional. We think that a jury verdict should mean more than our jury's verdict seems to mean, and so we are planning to appeal.
Absolutely. Filed a cross appeal. What would happen in that regard if they filed a cross appeal and then Sean Diddy Combs get a higher sentence?
He would not get a higher sentence, and they're not gonna cross appeal. We're gonna appeal. We think we're right, and they'll respond to the appeal, and it'll be decided by the Second Circuit as soon as.
Tell us about the conversation you had with your client after the sentencing.
Consensual. The judge clearly thought the sexual encounters weren't consensual.
Because he's biased.
What did you make of his remarks?
He's biased.
If anyone, I'm happy to go. So we think that's just absolutely inconsistent with the jury's verdict. I mean, the jury's verdict was resoundingly clear. There was no sex trafficking. There was no racketeering. Everything was consensual. Everything was adult, which is why he was convicted only of the prostitution offense. What we feel happened today was that the judge acted as a 13th juror, one that we did not choose, and that he second-guessed the jury's verdict.
Well, at least the judge was open-minded. At least the judge was open-minded for both sides. He gave consideration.
Did you have a chance to talk to Sean Combs? Did you have a chance to talk to your client? Can you tell us about the conversation after the sentence?
How was he?
How's your client?
How was it impact sex workers?
But he's okay.
Gotta push back a little.
But he's okay.
Come on, man.
Stop pushing people, y'all.
Y'all making it a circus now, bro.
Space out. He does feel justice was served, though. He said he takes accountability, and I felt like Diddy definitely took accountability for everything, sir. And I would like to just let you know that everything was not consensual, sir. Please don't say that. It was not consensual. Even Diddy admitted.
This is the defense team, man. Let's ask him a question.
Yes, but he did allegedly.
All right, Queen. All right, Queen. All right, Queen.
Mark, can you talk to us about talking to Sean after?
We're clearly all talking about domestic violence.
I'm not. Obviously, we spoke to Sean. I'm not going to talk about what Sean and we discussed. It's obviously a privilege.
We all feel comfortable bringing.
And tell us what
location are you going to recommend?
No matter which community it impacts.
What are the next steps?
Why weren't the sex workers on trial today?
Hold on, bro.
Where were the escorts? Stop, bro.
In a shocking twist that has left Hollywood and the entire hip-hop community in disbelief, Sean Diddy Combs has just ordered his lawyers to file a rapid appeal, hours after the judge delivered his devastating sentencing. What's driving this desperate move? And could it actually save him or make things worse?
The doors. We didn't know if that was going to happen. We didn't know if he was possibly going to get double-digit sentence. So I think the weight of the world you could kind of feel when he walked inside the courtroom today. He was wearing casual clothes, civilian clothes, so he wasn't in his MDC tan jumpsuit or anything like that, like he was at the last hearing that happened just last week. But today he appeared in a tan sweater, white undershirt, dark pants, similar to the looks that he was appearing in during trial. And then when he walked inside the courtroom today, Jesse, he waved at his family. He did kind of like a little prayer hand, but he did seem a little bit nervous, and I think it's possibly because they just didn't know where the sentencing would go. And so he sat at the defense table with his glasses, and then the proceedings began. But you can only imagine what was really going on in his mind as soon as he walked in, saw his family, saw the amount of people inside that courtroom, because Jesse, it was a packed house today, body to body, person to person. There was no seat left unseated today inside that courtroom.
Real quick, talk to me about that. I heard there was 30 people in the front rows that were friends and family of Sean Combs. Anybody notable?
So, Jesse, today inside the courtroom, it really was a kind of a little bit of a who's who was in there. I mean, everyone from Janice Combs, Diddy's mother, Keisha Combs, Diddy's sister, Dallas Austin, who was a music producer. He was inside that courtroom today. Sean Combs' children, that being Jesse and Delilah Combs, the twins. It was Quincy Brown who was there. Justin Combs was there. Christian Combs was there. But I think what was interesting, Jesse, and a notable guest, at least to me, was alleged victim number 3, and that being Gina Hunn. She came inside the courtroom a little bit later than the rest of the family, so she wasn't seated directly beside them. She was seated kind of more towards the back of the courtroom on the defense's side. So we did see her inside that courtroom today, and I think also another notable figure that I learned through this trial was a person named Rue, and that was Ruben, who was one of Sean Combs' security guards. He was inside the overflow courtroom. He didn't make it into the main courtroom, but he was present inside the courthouse. But other notable names that were inside that courtroom today, Jesse, were LaWanda Lane, who is a good friend of Kim Porter, who's also been reportedly taking care of the twins since Sean Combs has been incarcerated. Dana Tran, who is the mother of Sean Combs' youngest daughter, Love, she was inside that courtroom. Sarah Chapman, who is Chance's mother, was inside that courtroom. Misa Hilton, who is Justin's mother, was inside that courtroom. Charlucci, who's been a fixture throughout all of the trial, throughout all of the pretrial hearings even, too. One of Sean Combs' very good friends was inside that courtroom. Karen Agnifilo, lead attorney Mark Agnifilo's wife, was there, too. And so it really was just kind of a who's who, especially of Sean Combs' family and close friends. But I will say there wasn't any huge names that we were expecting, like a possible.
What unfolded inside that Manhattan courtroom could mark the beginning or the end of Diddy's empire. After months of silence and speculation, the verdict finally dropped. The federal court's decision against Diddy wasn't just a legal blow, it was a public humiliation. Judge Aaron Subramanian didn't mince words. His tone was cold, his message crystal clear. No one, not even a music mogul, is above the law. But the moment that gavel hit, Diddy's reaction said it all, a mix of disbelief and fury.
It was kind of a big shocker, to your point, Jesse, that she wasn't there, because we thought that she would be inside the courtroom, and we were kind of curious who the government witnesses who would be there to give their final victim impact statements ahead of the judge giving down Sean Combs' sentencing. But today, right off the bat, Christy Slavic, who is a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor, she said Mia no longer wishes to give an impact statement. She had submitted that written statement, and that the tone of the defense letter, I think, was what really kind of changed her mind as to coming into the courtroom today. And I can only imagine probably how Mia feels specifically. She's using a pseudonym even to testify, even as she's writing letters to the court, because of just the fear that she has been getting in terms of what she believed to be backlash, either from Sean Combs or his fans, or even just the attention that it's that the case has brought against her too. And so I was very surprised that she didn't attend court in person today, but I can understand why, because even the judge said to Mark Agnifilo today that the tone of the defense's letter in response to Mia giving a victim impact statement was just completely inappropriate. And it was a pretty harsh letter, Jesse. I'm sure that you've already read it, but it was kind of a very harsh tone, and it was kind of similar a little bit to her cross-examination too.
Now let's talk about the prosecution. So prosecutors today, they outlined their argument in court. It echoed a lot of what their filings were in anticipation of this sentencing. What were some of the key arguments, the themes that stood out today about why they say it was justified for Sean Combs to have a lengthy sentence? Remember, they were asking for 11 years. How did they justify it today? What were the arguments they made in court?
Well, today, Christy Slavic, making the arguments on behalf of the government, she said that today is about accountability and justice. And she was talking specifically about accountability, Jesse. She was talking about the conduct that was lasting for a 15-year period. I mean, even if you go back to the superseding indictments where it says this conduct went on from 2009 all the way to 2024, that's a long period of time. And so from the government's perspective, they really just wanted accountability from the defendant, that being Sean Combs. And then they also wanted justice, particularly for the victims. I know when we often talk about the Sean Combs case, the Diddy case, the P. Diddy case, he is the focus of this. But I think a lot of people have to remember that there were victims in this case, that being Cassie Ventura, that being Jane, that also kind of also applying to on some of the charges that he was acquitted for too, where you can also bring in like Mia and Capricorn Clark and Deontay Nash. And so I think the government from their perspective was really trying to speak on behalf of all of those people. And so today, Christy Slavic, again, she was saying that the law requires the court to know all about the defendant and the defendant's conduct. This isn't just a case about freak-offs and hotel nights. It's about a man who did horrible things to people. He weaponized currency against victims. They were talking about that even though he was convicted just on the Mann Act charges, that it's also kind of
Within hours of the sentencing, sources close to Diddy's legal camp confirmed what many suspected. He was not going down without a fight. According to court insiders, Diddy personally ordered his lawyer to move fast, file an emergency notice of appeal, bypassing the usual waiting period. This was not a typical legal response. It was a power move, a man refusing to accept defeat. Court documents show the appeal centres on claims of judicial overreach and media bias. But legal experts warn this strategy is risky. Legal experts estimate that fewer than 10% of federal appeals succeed, especially when tied to high-profile celebrity cases. But Diddy's team believes this case is different.
Because of his drug addiction, but they say that might be kind of the underlying reason. And then when you get to Nicole Westmoreland, she was talking about Sean Combs' inspiration and his commitment at MDC Brooklyn, where she was talking about all of his successful businesses. She was talking about how he started a record label from the ground up. She was talking about his clothing line. She was talking about his television company, that being Revolt, and that's where she started to really kind of get emotional, where she was saying that Sean Combs spent a majority of his adult life really trying to help the black community, really trying to give back to the community, that he isn't this larger than life persona, he's just a man who makes mistakes. When it came to the other defense attorneys speaking, Brian Steele was just very urging of the judge to please consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma throughout his life. Brian Steele urged the judge to consider that Sean Combs had untreated trauma in his life, and that there have been times in Sean Combs' life, especially when he had drugs in his system, that there were times where he had flatlined and that he was trying to be a better version of himself. And I feel like, Jesse, that was really the theme of all of what the defense was saying, that these 13 months were really reflective of Sean Combs. He wants to be a better person. He wants to leave the past in the past and be a better person for the future. And so even when it came to Xavier Donaldson, he was speaking about how Sean Combs should receive a just punishment. He brings up intent when he talks about Sean Combs' conviction of the Mann Act charges, and that Sean Combs isn't just a pimp, and that he was talking about his work at MDC Brooklyn, where Xavier Donaldson said, we've had assemblymen and politicians, billionaires in MDC, but nobody besides Sean Combs was there to actually help out the other detainees and the other inmates there. And then finally with Mark Agnifilo, his whole argument was that domestic violence comes with childhood trauma. So I feel like the defense was really kind of trying to pull at the heartstrings a little bit of the judge, and even possibly the public too, because this was their final say to all of the people, all of the media coverage that this case has brought attention to. And so I think at the end of the day, from the defense's perspective, they wanted everyone, including the judge, to just look at Sean Combs as a man who made terrible, terrible mistakes, and whether or not he's been punished enough for it, that was kind of what the judge had to consider today.
By the way, I think it was interesting that I think the prosecution said in response that only one of the 5 defense lawyers who spoke actually mentioned the victims. It was very much Sean Combs focused. Now, I say that because Sean Combs did something very interesting when he spoke. He mentioned the victims. We'll get to that in a second. Before we do, I wasn't in that courtroom, but I will tell you, I reading about this, I could feel the emotion that came out when Sean Combs' children provided statements. That felt like a turning point. The judge would later reference the children. Talk to us about who spoke, what.
Sources close to the defense say Diddy feels targeted, that the court of public opinion convicted him long before the jury did. As news of the appeal broke, reactions across Hollywood were immediate and divided. Some say he's fighting for justice. Others see it as another billionaire trying to twist the system. Those old words now echo louder than ever, because for the first time in his career, Diddy isn't controlling the narrative. To understand Diddy's desperation now, we have to go back to where the storm began. From his early label triumphs to legal battles that shadowed every success, Diddy's story has always been one of rise, fall, and reinvention. But this time,
family. So I think when he was saying those words, Jesse, I think he was really specifically talking about those impact letters and also seeing that 11-minute video about just all the extensive work that Sean Combs has done throughout his life outside of this federal case. And so the judge saying there's no doubt that you're devoted to your family, but the court knows that you do have problems with addiction, that drugs may have exacerbated your conduct over the years. So this was a moment where I was thinking, oh, well, maybe he'll be a little lighter on the sentence. That's what I was thinking. But then the judge said the court rejects the defense's narrative of the whole sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that this was just comes with the lifestyle of being an artist, a musician, a producer. The judge said you abused power and control over women who loved you. You used that abuse to get away, and the evidence of abuse in connection to freak-offs and hotel nights is massive. We saw the gashes and the bruises and the broken doors, and this is specifically talking about what Cassie had gone through throughout her, Cassie and Jane in that respect, throughout their relationships with Sean Combs, and that the judge said Jane and Cassie thought about both ending their lives, that these were very serious offenses. You plied Cassie with drugs. Your conduct went over for more than a decade. You were no John, but you were just more than that. And so then the judge is telling Sean Combs, well, you said you're sorry. One thing that strikes me is you brutally assaulted Jane. You punched, kicked her, slapped her so hard that she fell down. But I think when people think of this particular instance, well, the defense and the government say that this was one instance of physical violence when it came to Jane specifically. I think it's notable the timing of when this had happened. This had happened in June of 2024, just last year, but also notably after Cassie's lawsuit. This was after his homes were raided. This was after the video of him assaulting Cassie had leaked to CNN. And the judge said that even after he had physically assaulted Jane during this June 2024 incident, that he had said, and this was going by the court transcript, take this effing pill. You aren't going to ruin my effing night. You asked her also, is this coercive? And so I think from the judge's perspective, that was kind of a clear sign that the conduct has still been going on just pretty quickly or pretty recently. And so the judge also said these acts of sexual violence, substantial sentence must be given. So I was thinking maybe he would agree with the prosecution, possibly go for that 135 months. But he says he said, well, that's more than necessary. He said it's also not reasonable. And he said that the government's proposal doesn't take into consideration the mitigating factors, where it was the opposite for the defense, where the defense's proposal of pretty much being time served was that didn't take into consideration the aggravating factors. So that would be the violence and all of that. And so the judge said at the end, the defense's proposal is insufficient. And so he handed down that sentence of 50 months of incarceration. And the judge noted it's hard time in prison, but you will have a life after.
Inside the courtroom, witnesses describe a scene of controlled chaos. Diddy's family seated behind him, motionless. His attorney whispering, his face pale. When the sentence landed, observers said you could hear him whisper, "Appeal it now." And from that moment, everything changed. Brands are cutting ties, collaborators are going silent, and the empire Diddy built over 3 decades is now under federal review. But as his world collapses publicly, Diddy is privately preparing the fight of his life. His next move, to challenge not just the verdict, but the system itself. Diddy's legal team is pushing for a hearing within 60 days, an unusually fast timeline. But prosecutors have already filed a motion to deny. If the appeal is rejected, Diddy could face additional charges tied to obstruction and witness tampering, allegations his team fiercely denies. The stakes couldn't be higher, because this isn't just about Diddy's freedom, it's about his legacy. For decades, Diddy controlled the sound of an era, the look, the power, the culture. But now the only thing he can control is his next move. I've always believed I could rise above anything. But this time, it's not about rising, it's about surviving. This is Sean Diddy Combs, fighting not just the system, but the fall of his own empire.
And taking the time to address it, I think was important, but also saying to Sean Combs, you're loved. You have this love. You're giving you a second chance. Before we get into the reaction, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me we're talking 4 years, a little over 4 years in prison is what he was sentenced to, but he spent almost 14 months in in jail already at the MDC. He's going to get credit, I think, for time served. So it would be 3 years. And if I'm right, that there is a possibility you have to serve at least 85% of your time before you can even get released. We are talking, what, 2.5 to 3 years in prison? And correct me if I'm wrong there. Was that, before I get into the reaction of everybody in the courtroom, what it was like, you've been covering this case from the very beginning. So A, am I right about 2.5, 3 years? But also, were you surprised by that sentence?
So to answer your first question, I was doing the math. Honestly, I was doing times tables, multiplication, division, just to figure out how much time he actually was sentenced to. Because again, these are in terms of months and not years. So yes, with some quick math, it's around that 2.5, 3 year sentence. And then with credit of time served, it's possible that he could be out by pretty quickly, as opposed to what the government was hoping for, which would have been those double-digit numbers. But in terms of just overall the totality of this case, you know, given that we thought there could have been that possibility had he been convicted of the other charges, that it could have been anywhere from 20 years to life in prison. So to see that at the end of the sentence, at the end of the trial, after we've heard all the evidence, after the jury made their decision, through everything, that in terms of his full sentence, yeah, so about 2.5, 3.5, 4 years, and then credit of time served. So it could be out relatively sooner than, you know, what could have been the harsher end of that sentence. But I think overall, just listening to 2 months of trial plus all the pretrial hearings, because I think the pretrial hearings were very important too, because there was 2 words that couldn't be uttered throughout this entire trial, and that was coercive control. And so from my perspective,